Have you ever wondered if there's a hidden key, something Jesus said that could completely transform your life? Not just inspire you for a moment, but truly shift your direction, unlock doors you never thought possible, and lead you into a level of peace, purpose, and power you've never experienced. This isn't about religion. It's not about tradition. It's about revelation. Divine truth that breaks chains, opens your eyes, and sets your spirit on fire. We're diving into a message that many have heard, but few have truly understood. Because Jesus didn't come to start another belief system. He came to reveal a kingdom, to invite you into a way of living that flips the world's values upside down and leads you into supernatural clarity. There are secrets in the words of Jesus, life-altering secrets, but most people miss them because they're too distracted by noise, too busy chasing things that don't last. What if you've been searching in all the wrong places? What if what you've been praying for has already been spoken and it's hidden in plain sight? Jesus doesn't waste words. Every sentence he spoke carries eternal weight. But some of his words go deeper than they appear, layered with meaning, power, and destiny. And one of those words, one secret, has the potential to change the way you think, the way you pray, the way you walk through this life. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You see, we live in a time where people are desperate for answers, anxious about the future, pressured by expectations, drained by constant comparison. And somewhere in the middle of all that noise, Jesus is still whispering, there is a better way, a higher way, a path that leads to peace in the storm, confidence in the chaos, and provision in the wilderness. And here's what's wild. He already gave us the answer. The problem is, we've looked past it. We've been trained to admire his words without applying them. But that changes today, because we're going back to the source, back to the raw, unfiltered message of the Messiah, the words that echo through time and still break through the hardest hearts. This isn't for the casual listener. This is for the hungry soul, the one who knows there's more, the one who's tired of surface-level faith, the one who senses deep down that God is trying to get their attention. Because when Jesus speaks, he's not just giving information, he's giving invitation. And if you're willing to lean in just a little, he'll show you what's been missing. He'll open your eyes to the kingdom reality that's been waiting for you all along. This is the moment where everything can shift, not because of emotion, not because of hype, but because truth, real truth, has the power to break every limitation. The words of Jesus are not motivational quotes. They are the foundation of life. And buried within them is a mystery, a secret, a revelation that isn't meant to be admired, sir, but to be lived. And now, it's time to uncover it. If something inside you is already stirring, if a part of your heart feels like it's waking up, then don't ignore it. That's not just emotion, it's a signal, a divine nudge, and it means you're exactly where you need to be. Before we go any deeper, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever felt like God was trying to show you something, but you couldn't quite understand what it was? Your voice matters. Your story might encourage someone else who's watching this right now. And if this message is already speaking to you, if it's opening your eyes or confirming something you've felt in your spirit, then take a second to hit that like button. It helps this message reach more people who need to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because what we're about to uncover in the words of Jesus might just be the missing piece you've been praying for. There's more ahead. Stay with me. Topic 1. The hidden power of the kingdom. Unlocking what most believers miss. There's something Jesus said that many people have heard, quoted, even preached about, but never truly understood. A verse repeated in churches, shared on social media, printed on mugs and t-shirts, yet its full weight remains a mystery to most. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added to you. At first glance, it sounds like encouragement, a promise. But under the surface, this verse is far more than a gentle reminder. It's a spiritual law, a divine equation. a key that unlocks the very heart of heaven. Jesus didn't speak this during a quiet moment of comfort. These words came in the middle of a radical teaching that flipped human logic upside down. He was confronting worry, fear, the endless chase for material needs, what we eat, what we wear, how we survive. And then, in one powerful sentence, he revealed something shocking. The solution to all of it wasn't found in striving harder, worrying more, or trying to control everything. It was found in surrender, in focus, in a kingdom that operates by heaven's rhythm, not earth's systems. But what does it mean to seek first the kingdom of God? It's not about attending church every Sunday or memorizing Bible verses, although those things can help. It's deeper. To seek the kingdom means to actively pursue God's rule in every part of your life. It means asking not, "What do I want today?" but "What does heaven want from me today?" It means letting go of the illusion of control and stepping into alignment with a higher authority, one that governs not with fear, but with truth, peace, and power. This is where most people get stuck, because the kingdom doesn't look the way we expect. It's not flashy, it's not loud, it's not about positions of power or religious pride. It's about heart posture, about humility, but living from the inside out instead of reacting to everything around us. That's why Jesus also said, "The kingdom of God is within you," not something you have to chase, but something you must awaken to. And when you do, everything changes. The reason this secret is so powerful is because it reorders your entire life. Jesus wasn't giving us a spiritual suggestion. He was revealing a divine sequence. When the kingdom comes first, everything else finds its place. It doesn't mean life will be perfect. It means you'll be perfectly aligned. It means provision will follow purpose. It means clarity will replace confusion. Peace will overtake panic. But it requires a shift, a decision, a breaking of old habits and the birth of a new focus. Many believers pray for God to fix their situation without realizing He already gave them the principle to walk in breakthrough. It's not hidden because God wants to withhold it. It's hidden because only the hungry will find it. Only those who are willing to slow down, lean in, and truly listen will uncover its depth. That's why Jesus spoke in parables, to filter out the curious from the committed, to reveal treasure only to those willing to dig. And if you're still here, still listening, then maybe this message is for you. Maybe God is whispering to your spirit right now, "You've been chasing the wrong things. Come back to me, seek my kingdom first, and I will take care of the rest." That's not just a comfort, it's a command, and it's also a promise. When you obey, heaven responds. There's a reason why some people seem to walk in favor, peace, and clarity, even in the midst of storms. It's not luck, it's not personality, it's alignment. They've made the kingdom their priority, not just their backup plan. And because of that, the things others stress about begin to fall into place for them. Not instantly, not without struggle, but with supernatural consistency. This is what Jesus wanted you to see. This is the secret that can change everything, not just spiritually, but practically. Your relationships, your finances, your mental health, your direction in life, they all fall under this kingdom principle. And the moment you decide to live it out, to put Him first in every area, you step into something bigger than yourself. Now, I want to hear from you. Let's break the silence. If this is speaking to you, leave a comment below. Tell me if you've ever felt like you were missing the bigger picture, or just type "Kingdom First" if you're ready to realign your life starting today. Your words matter, and someone else might read your comment and realize they're not alone. Topic 2. Living in kingdom mode, escaping the trap of survival thinking. Most people live their entire lives in what we could call survival mode. Wake up, work, worry, repeat. Constantly chasing after money, acceptance, security, answers, and underneath all of it, stress, anxiety, pressure, fear of the future. This is the default setting of a world disconnected from the kingdom. Jesus knew this all too well. That's why when he said, "Seek first the kingdom," it wasn't just a theological principle. It was a rescue mission from the trap of survival thinking. He was offering an entirely different operating system, a way of life called kingdom mode. And living in kingdom mode means stepping out of the noise and into divine clarity. It's about reprogramming your mindset from scarcity to abundance, from panic to peace, from hustle to purpose. And this isn't some vague spiritual concept. It's deeply practical, because what you seek first determines what controls your life. If you're constantly seeking validation from people, then people will control your emotions. If you're chasing money, then fear of lack will drive your decisions. But if you seek the kingdom first, then heaven becomes your source, and the weight you've been carrying starts to lift. Let's be honest, we've all felt the pressure to make things happen, to grind harder, to figure everything out. It's the culture we live in, one that glorifies busyness, idolizes success, and shames rest. But the kingdom flips that completely. Jesus didn't walk in stress. He moved in peace. He didn't chase opportunities. Opportunities found him. Why? Because he was always in alignment with the Father's will. That's kingdom mode. It's trusting divine timing over your own. It's surrendering the illusion of control and embracing the truth that your life is not random. It's designed. When you start operating from this place, everything shifts. You begin to realize that God's not just interested in fixing your problems. He wants to realign your entire life. He's not a spiritual emergency button. He's a father, a king. And when you live under his reign, you step into supernatural provision, not just financially, but emotionally, mentally, relationally. That's why Jesus said, "All these things will be added to you," because kingdom mode doesn't subtract, it multiplies. It doesn't drain you, it fills you. Now let's go even deeper. One of the biggest reasons people stay stuck in survival mode is because they're trying to do kingdom things with a worldly mindset. They hear "put God first" and interpret it as add more spiritual tasks to your busy life. But the kingdom isn't about doing more. It's about being more aligned. It's not about performance. It's about positioning. You can go to church, read your Bible, serve on a team, and still be out of alignment if your heart is not surrendered. Kingdom mode requires internal transformation, not just external activity. This is where faith becomes more than belief. It becomes action. Because seeking the kingdom first often requires you to say no to things that the world celebrates. It might mean walking away from a relationship that doesn't reflect God's heart. It might mean leaving a job that pays well but poisons your soul. It might mean setting boundaries, choosing peace over popularity, or trusting God with your next step when you can't even see the full path. It's not easy, but it's worth it. Because the kingdom always leads to life. There's also a mysterious beauty to kingdom mode. It teaches you how to hear God's voice, not just in church, not just in quiet time, but in everyday decisions. You start to feel a holy nudge, a whisper of wisdom, a check in your spirit. You no longer live by impulse, you live by insight. And that insight doesn't come from logic, it comes from intimacy, from walking closely with the King, from choosing to trust even when it doesn't make sense. That's the secret sauce. That's where the breakthroughs happen. And here's the thing most people don't realize. Survival mode is addictive. It makes you feel productive, important, in control. But it's a trap, a hamster wheel. And Jesus is standing right outside of it, arms open, saying, "There's a better way. Come out, live higher." Kingdom mode is freedom. It's clarity. It's waking up in the morning knowing that heaven has your back, that your steps are ordered, that you're not behind, you're not forgotten. You're exactly where you need to be. So now I want to hear from you. If this resonates, if you've been stuck in survival mode and you're ready to shift, drop a comment below. You can even write, "I choose kingdom mode," or tell me what's been keeping you stuck. Your honesty could unlock freedom for someone else. Remember, when you speak it, you start to own it, and you're not alone. This is a journey, and we're walking it together. Topic 3. God is your source, not the system, not the salary, not the struggle. One of the most liberating yet deeply confronting truths that Jesus came to reveal is this: God is your source, not your paycheck, not your business, not your connections, not your backup plan. And until you truly believe that, deep in your bones, you'll always be living in some form of fear. The world has conditioned us to rely on systems, career paths, financial stability, social status, insurance plans. And while there's wisdom in structure and preparation, the problem arises when those things become the foundation instead of the fruit. Because when your sense of safety is rooted in anything other than God, it will eventually crumble. Jesus was painfully aware of this trap. That's why he spoke so directly about it. He didn't say, try to trust God a little more each day. No, he said things like, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. That's not a gentle suggestion. That's a command. And it's radical, especially in a culture obsessed with productivity, success, and self-reliance. But it's not meant to be a burden. It's meant to free you, because if God is truly your source, then lack has no authority over you. Delay has no power to define you, and fear no longer dictates your decisions. This message cuts deep because many of us have been programmed to depend on what we can see, what we can measure, what we can control. It feels safer that way. But Jesus came to train us in a different kind of vision, kingdom vision. He wanted us to learn how to walk by faith, not by sight, to see provision in the wilderness, to expect manna when there's no bakery, to believe that when God calls you to it, He will also provide for it, even if the numbers don't add up, even if the doors look closed, even if the timing feels off. We've all had those moments when the bills are stacked, the anxiety is high, and your mind starts racing with what ifs. What if the money doesn't come through? What if I can't pay rent? What if I fail? But what if God already made a way you can't see yet? What if your provision has already been scheduled by heaven, and your job is simply to stay aligned with the one who never runs dry? That's what it means to treat God as your source. It's not denial of reality, it's deeper awareness of a higher reality. When Jesus fed the 5,000, He didn't start with a warehouse full of food. He started with a few loaves and fish and lifted them to heaven. He gave thanks before the multiplication. Why? Because He understood the source. The little in His hands wasn't the limitation, it was the seed, and when surrendered to the Father, it became more than enough. That story isn't just about a miracle that happened once. It's a blueprint for how kingdom provision works. God takes what you have when you release it in trust, and He does the impossible with it, but only when you stop clinging to it in fear. So many people unknowingly idolize the very things they fear losing. The job becomes the idol, the savings account, the platform, the plan, and then they wonder why anxiety keeps creeping in. It's because anything you depend on more than God becomes a weight instead of a blessing. That's why the wilderness was so important for the Israelites. It stripped away every false source, no crops, no wells, no fallback plan, just daily dependence on the presence and provision of God. It wasn't punishment, it was training. God was reprogramming their hearts to know, I am enough, I will provide, I am your source. And that training is still happening today. Some of you are in a wilderness season not because God is angry with you, but because He's trying to disconnect you from the things you've secretly been relying on. He's trying to teach you how to breathe in the quiet, how to trust when the path is dark, how to rest when everything says panic. Because only when you lose the illusion of control can you truly find the power of surrender. And it's in that surrender that miracles begin. You may not see the full picture yet, and that's okay. You may not have all the resources, the connections, the approval you think you need, but you have something far greater. You have the presence of the provider, and that's more than enough. So take a deep breath. Stop striving, stop comparing. Stop assuming that your breakthrough has to look like someone else's story. God writes custom chapters, and He's not late. He's precise, He's strategic. And he's waiting for you to stop clutching what's temporary so he can place in your hands what's eternal. Now I want you to take a moment and let this sink in. If any part of this message hit home, if you've been struggling to really see God as your only source, drop a comment below. Write something like, "God is my source," or share what false sources you've been letting go of lately. Your words may give courage to someone who's right on the edge. Let's fill the comments with faith and honesty, because that's how real transformation begins. Topic 4. The silent war within. When fear masquerades as wisdom. There's a silent war happening inside so many people, and they don't even realize it. On the outside, they appear wise, cautious, calculated, responsible. But underneath all that logic, something far more dangerous is hiding: fear. And it's subtle. It dresses itself up in good intentions. It whispers things like, "Be careful, don't take risks, wait until the timing is right." And while those phrases sound like wisdom, they often mask a deeper truth, one that Jesus came to expose. Because when fear takes the throne of your decisions, faith gets silenced, and the kingdom life becomes impossible to live. This is the battlefield most never talk about. Not the one out there in the world, but the one inside, between trust and control, between obedience and hesitation, between heaven's leading and human logic. And fear is a master of disguise. It wears the clothes of strategy. It pretends to be discernment, but deep down it's not heaven's voice you're hearing. It's the echo of past disappointments. It's the trauma of what didn't work last time. It's the protective walls we've built around ourselves in the name of being smart, when really we're just scared. Jesus wasn't passive about fear. He confronted it head on. Over and over he said, "Do not be afraid," not as a suggestion, but as a command. Because he knew that fear, when left unchecked, becomes a prison. It blinds you to possibilities. It shrinks your vision. It causes you to miss divine appointments simply because they don't look safe or predictable. The kingdom doesn't operate in the realm of comfort. It operates in the realm of obedience. And that often means walking into situations that scare your flesh, but stretch your faith. Some of you have been praying for God to open doors, and he already has. But fear is standing in the hallway, convincing you not to walk through them. You feel it in your chest, that racing heart, that tight throat, that overthinking spiral that plays every worst-case scenario in your mind like a movie trailer for failure. And you call it preparation, but it's paralysis. You've spiritualized fear and called it wisdom, but the fruit doesn't lie. Because real wisdom brings peace, not panic. It brings clarity, not confusion. It leads you forward, not into hiding. The enemy knows he can't steal your calling, so he tries to delay it. And his favorite tactic isn't always temptation, it's intimidation. He'll surround your next step with uncertainty, with risk, with fog, just enough to make you doubt, just enough to make you freeze, just enough to make you wait for more confirmation when God has already spoken. And while you wait, opportunities pass. People who needed your voice, your gift, your presence, they're left waiting too. Because your obedience isn't just about you, it's a key that unlocks someone else's breakthrough. Fear doesn't just affect your decisions, it affects your identity. It convinces you that you're not ready, not equipped, not worthy. It causes you to shrink when you should be stepping up. It tells you to be quiet when you were born to speak. It makes you settle for survival when you were created for impact. And over time, that voice becomes normal. It becomes part of your thought process. You stop questioning it. You start agreeing with it. And that's where the real danger lies. Not in the fear itself, but in your agreement with it. But the moment you recognize it for what it is, everything begins to shift. Because fear loses its power the second it's exposed. The second you say, "Wait, this isn't wisdom, this is worry in disguise," the chains begin to fall. And suddenly, what felt like a wall becomes a window. What felt like a storm becomes a test. What felt like an end becomes a setup for something greater. That's how the kingdom flips the script. God doesn't remove the fear first. He calls you to move through it. And on the other side, you find out who you really are. There's a version of you that exists beyond the fear, a version that doesn't second-guess every move, a version that knows heaven is backing you even when the odds aren't. That version of you is bold, obedient, in sync with God's whisper, and unshaken by man's opinion. That version of you is still in there, under the weight of worry, waiting to rise. And the way to unlock it isn't by trying harder, it's by surrendering deeper. By choosing to believe that God's plans are not just good, they're trustworthy. So now, take a moment and ask yourself, what area of your life have you been calling wisdom, but deep down, you know it's actually fear? Is it a dream you've put on hold? A relationship you're afraid to walk away from? A calling you're scared to step into? You don't have to answer out loud, but I do want you to answer somewhere. And if you feel led, leave a comment below. Say something like, I'm choosing faith over fear, or share a moment where you realized fear was faking as wisdom. Let's create a space where truth breaks through, because you're not the only one in this battle, and you don't have to fight it alone. Topic 5. The voice that changes everything. How Jesus still speaks in the silence. There comes a moment in every journey when noise isn't the problem. It's the silence that begins to feel overwhelming. You pray, but it feels like heaven is quiet. You worship, but the weight doesn't lift. You read the word, but the words don't seem to jump off the page like they used to. And that's the space where many people start to drift, to doubt, to disconnect. But what if the silence isn't absence? What if it's an invitation? What if Jesus still speaks, but you're being trained to hear him in a deeper way? Because the truth is, the voice of Jesus doesn't always come in the thunder. Sometimes it comes in a whisper, and only those who are willing to quiet their world can hear it. One of the greatest misunderstandings about the kingdom life is that God is always going to speak loudly, clearly, dramatically. Burning bushes, angelic visitations, audible instructions, but that's not the pattern we see in Scripture. Time and time again, God chooses the stillness. He speaks through dreams, through impressions, through moments of deep conviction that no one else can see. And it's in those sacred, quiet places that destinies are often born. Not on stages, not in crowds, but in caves, in deserts, in lonely places. That's where clarity comes, and that's why the silence you're feeling might be more meaningful than you realize. When Jesus went into the wilderness for 40 days, he wasn't just being tested by the enemy. He was tuning into the voice of the Father. Every temptation Satan threw at him was met with truth, not emotion, not opinion. Truth that Jesus had hidden in his heart during years of unseen preparation. That's what most people miss. We want to hear God in the crisis, but we don't train ourselves to hear him in the stillness. The volume of God's voice in your life will often match the level of your surrender. The more you quiet the distractions, the more clearly you begin to recognize what he's been saying all along. And sometimes, his voice doesn't answer your question. It reveals a new question altogether. You come asking, when will things change? And he responds with, will you trust me while nothing changes? You ask, why did this happen? And he says, will you still believe I'm good even when you don't understand? This is the voice that separates fans from followers, because the voice of Jesus doesn't cater to comfort. It calls you into transformation. And transformation often requires discomfort, stretching, and sitting in the tension without rushing the process. Think about it. Every time Jesus called someone, his voice interrupted their routine. He didn't send a letter. He didn't wait for a formal invitation. He showed up in the middle of work, pain, confusion, and spoke a word that shifted everything. Follow me. Get up. Go. Your faith has made you well. Short phrases, but full of eternal power, and the ones who responded weren't the ones who had it all figured out. They were the ones who recognized the authority in the voice. That's what you're training your spirit to do, to recognize the whisper of God, even when the world is screaming other things. It's in that whisper that clarity begins to form, not always with answers, but with alignment. Suddenly, you know what to say no to, You begin to feel peace in places you once felt pressure. You start making decisions that don't make sense to others, but make perfect sense in the kingdom. That's the fruit of a life led by the voice of the shepherd. And the more you respond to it, the more sensitive you become. Not hypersensitive to fear or rejection, but spiritually sensitive to heaven's rhythm. Now let's be honest, hearing God's voice doesn't always feel supernatural. Sometimes it feels like a simple thought, a sudden idea, a scripture that won't leave your mind. But when you've trained your heart in intimacy, those moments become sacred. You begin to notice divine fingerprints on ordinary days. A conversation that confirms something you were praying about, a song lyric that hits you in just the right moment, a person who reaches out and says exactly what you needed to hear. It's not coincidence, it's confirmation. God still speaks. He's never stopped. The question is, are you still listening? And if you're in a season where the silence feels deafening, I want you to know you're not being ignored. You're being invited deeper, closer, higher. The silence might feel like a void, but it's actually a womb. Something is forming in you, strength, maturity, discernment. And when God finally does speak, you'll hear him not as a distant voice, but as a trusted guide. Because the silence taught you how to lean in, how to wait, how to recognize his voice in a world filled with counterfeits. So right now, take a moment and reflect. What's one area where you've been craving clarity, but all you've received is stillness? Could that stillness be sacred? Could it be God tuning your ears for something you've never heard before? And if this part of the message is resonating with your heart, drop a comment below. You could write, "I'm learning to hear in the silence," or share a moment where God spoke to you in an unexpected way. Let's keep this conversation alive, because someone might read your story and realize maybe God is whispering to them too. Topic 6. Obedience unlocks the supernatural. The missing link between hearing and breakthrough. There's a truth that sounds simple, but carries the weight to shift your entire life. Hearing God is only the beginning. Obeying him is what unlocks the supernatural. We live in a culture obsessed with knowledge, always seeking the next revelation, the next podcast, the next prophetic word. But revelation without action is just spiritual entertainment. It stirs emotions, maybe even inspires hope, but it won't change anything unless it leads to obedience. And that's the part many people avoid, not because they're rebellious, but because obedience is risky. It asks something from you. It costs comfort, control, and convenience. It invites you to move before you see the outcome, to act when the numbers don't add up, to trust when the details are blurry. And yet, this is the very place where God moves most powerfully. In Scripture, there's a consistent pattern. Miracles happen after obedience. The water didn't turn to wine until the servants poured it. Peter didn't walk on water until he stepped out of the boat. The man with the withered hand wasn't healed until he stretched it out. The walls of Jericho didn't fall until they marched and shouted. Over and over we see God's power revealed on the other side of someone's risky obedience. Not before, not after thinking about it for a few weeks, but in the moment of action, when faith becomes movement. That's because obedience is heaven's signal. It's what tells God, I trust you more than my logic. I trust you more than my fear. I trust you more than what I can see. And when that trust becomes real, tangible, practical, heaven responds. Not because we earned a miracle, but because we stepped into alignment with the one who performs it. The supernatural doesn't follow talent, charisma, or even desperation. It follows alignment. And alignment happens when we stop asking God to bless our plans and start following his instructions, even when they don't make sense. Some of you have been waiting for breakthrough, but breakthrough is waiting for you. Not in the distant future, not after you feel 100% ready, but in the obedience you've been delaying. Maybe it's a phone call you're afraid to make, a step you've been hesitating to take, a habit God's been asking you to surrender. a dream he placed in your heart that you've buried under fear. It's not that God is distant, it's that obedience is the key that opens the next door. And until you turn that key, you stay stuck in the hallway, wondering why nothing's shifting. It's easy to spiritualize delay. We say things like, I'm praying about it, or I'm waiting on confirmation, but deep down, we already know what God said. We're just hoping for a different answer. We're hoping He'll change the instruction to something easier, something safer, something that fits our timeline. But God doesn't negotiate obedience. He's not looking for agreement. He's looking for surrender, because it's in that surrender that transformation happens. Not just in your circumstances, but in you. Obedience doesn't just change what's around you, it reshapes who you are on the inside. When Abraham took Isaac up the mountain, he wasn't just proving his faith, he was passing a test of trust. He didn't know there was a ram waiting in the thicket. He just knew God said go. And in that moment, faith had to look like footsteps. The same is true for you. There's a provision you haven't seen yet, a door you haven't reached yet, a miracle that hasn't been revealed yet, not because God is holding it back, but because it's positioned on the path of your obedience. The moment you move, the moment you align, the moment you obey, something shifts in the spirit. But here's the part we don't like to admit. Obedience often feels inconvenient. It will ask you to give when it's uncomfortable, to forgive when it's undeserved, to show up when you feel unseen, to build when nothing looks promising. That's where many people stop. They want the blessing without the burden, the breakthrough without the process. But Jesus never promised an easy path. He promised a purposeful one. And obedience is how you walk it, step by step, word by word, even when it costs you, especially when it costs you. Because what feels like a loss in the moment is often the seed of your next harvest. And I get it. Obedience can feel lonely. People might not understand. Friends might question your decisions. Family might think you're being too radical. But you weren't called to follow comfort. You were called to follow Christ, and His voice will never lead you into compromise. It may lead you into the fire, but like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you'll discover He's already there, waiting, protecting, refining, rewarding, because obedience isn't just a test, it's a setup for encounter. So here's what I want you to reflect on right now. What's the last thing God clearly told you to do that you haven't acted on yet? That's where your next level is hidden. That's where the door opens. That's where the oil flows. And if this is hitting your heart, I want to invite you to make a move, not just in your mind, but in the comments. Write something like, I choose obedience, or share what small step of obedience you're committing to this week. You never know. Your step might inspire someone else's breakthrough. Topic 7. You were never meant to carry it all. The power of surrender in a culture of control. We live in a world that celebrates control. Control over your image, your schedule, your future. Society teaches us that the more you control, the more successful and secure you'll feel. But Jesus came to reveal something completely different. You were never designed to carry it all. The weight of expectations, the pressure to perform, the fear of failure, none of that was ever meant to sit on your shoulders. And yet, so many people are walking through life with invisible burdens, smiling on the outside while silently suffocating on the inside, because somewhere along the way, they believed the lie that being strong means doing everything alone. But the kingdom of God doesn't operate through self-sufficiency. It flows through surrender. That's why Jesus said, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Not advice, not instructions, not a productivity hack. Rest. True, soul-level rest that can only be found when you stop striving and start trusting. But here's the tension. Rest doesn't come naturally in a culture of hustle. We're taught to keep pushing, keep grinding, keep proving our worth. And in that endless race, even spiritual things can become performance. We turn our devotion into duty, our calling into comparison, and our faith into a checklist of expectations we were never meant to meet. Surrender is not weakness, it's wisdom. It's the moment you realize that letting go is not giving up, it's giving God the space to move. So many people are praying for peace but refusing to release control. They want God to guide them, but only if the path looks predictable. They ask for breakthrough, but resist when it doesn't fit their plan. And that internal tension creates spiritual exhaustion because you can't live in kingdom rest while operating in worldly control. You have to choose. Will you be the manager of your own life, or will you hand the keys over to the one who sees the whole picture? Even Jesus modeled surrender. In the Garden of Gethsemane, knowing the weight of what was coming, he still said, "Not my will, but yours be done." That wasn't just a moment of obedience, it was a moment of surrender. He laid down his right to control the outcome, to avoid the pain, to rewrite the plan. And in doing so, he unlocked the greatest victory the world has ever known. That's the paradox of the kingdom. What looks like loss often leads to life. What feels like giving up often leads to gaining everything that truly matters. And let's be honest, surrender is terrifying when you've spent your whole life depending on yourself. Maybe you've been hurt by people who let you down, so you learned to be your own protector. Maybe life taught you that vulnerability equals danger, so now you hold everything close, tight, calculated. But here's the reality. God cannot heal what you continue to hide. He cannot bless what you refuse to release. And sometimes the biggest breakthrough is not in doing something new, but in finally laying something down. That relationship, that timeline, that identity you've built around proving you're enough. This is where faith becomes real. Not just faith for miracles, but faith in the process. Faith that even when you don't have the answers, God is still working. Faith that even when you feel unseen, heaven hasn't missed a detail. Faith that letting go won't leave you empty. It will make space for what's next. And that kind of faith only grows in surrender. Not once, not in a moment of emotion, but daily, quietly. In the unseen places where no one claps, but heaven takes notice. There's a reason so many of us are tired, and it's not just physical, it's spiritual, mental, emotional, because we're carrying things we were never designed to carry. Anxiety about the future, regret about the past, fear of rejection, pressure to succeed, guilt for not doing more. But Jesus never asked you to carry those things. He asked you to follow him. And following him means traveling light. It means trusting that his yoke is easy, his burden is light, and his timing is perfect, even when it doesn't match yours. So here's the question I want to ask you. What are you still holding on to? What weight are you carrying that God has already offered to lift? Maybe it's time to stop managing the pressure and start surrendering the plan. Maybe it's time to trade the illusion of control for the reality of peace. Maybe it's time to open your hands and say, God, I don't have to figure it all out. I just need to follow you. That's where transformation begins. Not in striving harder, but in trusting deeper. And if this is speaking to you, I want to invite you to be bold in the comments. Write something like, I surrender the weight, or I choose rest over control. You don't have to share every detail, but your words might help someone else realize they're not alone in what they're carrying. Let's create a space where surrender isn't weakness, it's worship, where letting go becomes the beginning of something holy. Topic 8. Peace isn't the absence of chaos, it's the presence of the King. So here you are, surrendered, letting go, doing your best to trust God in a world that feels anything but stable. But then life happens. Bills still need to be paid. People still disappoint you. Deadlines still pile up. Unexpected diagnoses show up. The chaos doesn't always go away just because you're walking in obedience. And that's where so many people get discouraged. They assume that walking with God means everything will get easier, calmer, more predictable. But the promise was never that life would be free of storms. The promise was that peace would be available in the midst of them. Because peace isn't the absence of chaos. Peace is the presence of the King. It's not about controlling what's around you. It's about being anchored in who is within you. And that changes everything. It changes how you show up in pressure-filled moments. It changes how you respond to people who try to provoke you. It changes how you interpret pain, rejection, and even delay. When you understand that peace is a person, Jesus himself, you begin to realize that you can be surrounded by uncertainty and still remain unshaken. That's what made Jesus so radical. He slept in the middle of a storm. The boat was rocking, the disciples were panicking, and he was resting. Not because he didn't care, but because he carried something they hadn't learned to access yet. He knew the wind and waves didn't have the final word. His Father did. And that awareness changes everything. When you're confident in who's with you, the noise around you starts to lose its power. You stop letting circumstances narrate your peace, and you start letting his presence define your reality. But let's be honest. That kind of peace doesn't come naturally. It's not automatic. You don't drift into it, you grow into it. You cultivate it through daily surrender, deep trust, and a renewed mind. Because everything around you is designed to pull you into anxiety, news headlines, social media timelines, conversations filled with fear, comparison, and urgency. The world is addicted to chaos. It thrives on the next crisis. And if you're not rooted in something stronger, you'll get swept into it before you even realize what's happening. That's why peace must be protected. It's a treasure, and like anything valuable, it has to be guarded intentionally. You have to learn how to say no to voices that stir up fear. You have to choose stillness over constant noise. You have to turn down the volume of everything else so that the whisper of God becomes your loudest influence. Because the voice you believe will always determine the future you walk into. And the voice of peace never rushes, never manipulates, never condemns. It leads gently, clearly, and consistently. Sometimes peace feels like quiet confidence. Other times, it's a firm no when pressure is telling you to say yes. Sometimes it's choosing rest instead of proving your worth. Other times, it's sitting still when everything in you wants to run. It's not always comfortable, but it's always sacred. And if you've ever tasted that kind of peace, even for a moment, you know how powerful it is. You know how different it feels to walk through the fire without letting the fire get inside of you. That's the power of kingdom peace. It doesn't remove you from reality. It carries you through it with clarity, strength, and divine perspective. Peace doesn't mean you won't feel pain. It means pain won't define you. It doesn't mean you won't face loss. It means loss won't break you. It doesn't mean you'll never feel afraid. It means fear doesn't get to decide your next move. That's the difference between emotional stability and spiritual authority. One reacts to life, the other governs it. And you were never meant to just survive storms. You were called to speak to them. But you can't speak peace if you don't carry it. And you can't carry it if you're constantly plugged into chaos. That's why Jesus didn't just teach peace. He embodied it. Wherever he went, confusion had to bow, demons had to flee, sickness had to surrender, because the atmosphere around him was governed by something higher. That same peace is available to you, not as a concept, as a lifestyle, a spiritual posture, a kingdom default. But you have to choose it, you have to protect it. You have to stop expecting peace to magically appear once your problems disappear. You have to pursue it in the midst of the mess and say, Jesus, I trust you more than what I see. So take a breath right now, not a shallow one, a deep one. Let it settle. And ask yourself, have you been chasing peace by trying to fix everything around you? Or are you learning to find peace by trusting the one within you? And if this message is speaking directly to your heart today, let's make it personal. Scroll down and leave a comment. You could write something like, "Peace is my portion," or "I choose presence over panic." Or even share a moment where God gave you peace in the middle of the chaos. Your story has power. Let's keep this conversation alive for others who are searching for the same stillness. Topic 9. Provision follows purpose. You're not behind, you're being positioned. If there's one lie that's caused more anxiety, burnout, and discouragement than most people realize, it's the idea that you're behind, that you missed your moment, that someone else got ahead while you were stuck, waiting, trusting, obeying, holding on to promises that still haven't shown up. And in a world that celebrates speed, visibility, and instant success, it's easy to feel like you're falling behind in your calling. But what if the truth is the complete opposite? What if this isn't delay at all? What if it's divine positioning? What if God isn't withholding anything from you, but is preparing everything for you, because provision always follows purpose, not pressure? We've been trained to think like the world. Hustle culture tells you to chase success, to push harder, to force open doors before they're ready. And when things don't happen quickly, we internalize it as failure. We think we're doing something wrong. We question if we missed God's voice. We scroll through social media, see someone else launching a business, getting married, moving forward, and suddenly our peace evaporates. But the kingdom doesn't operate on comparison. It operates on timing. And God's timing is always layered with strategy. He's not just working on the blessing, he's also working on you. Because if you step into something before you're built to carry it, it will crush you instead of grow you. Purpose comes first, then provision aligns. That's why Jesus said, "Seek first the kingdom, and all these things will be added to you." He didn't say, "Chase the things and try to squeeze God into your calendar." He said, "Seek me, and I will handle what you're worried about." And that's not just a spiritual principle, it's a practical one. Because when you walk in purpose, your needs become heaven's responsibility. Your assignment becomes a container for supernatural provision. God funds what he births. He covers what he commissions. And when you're doing what you were created to do, you won't have to manipulate or beg for breakthrough. It finds you. But here's where it gets personal. Sometimes the preparation season feels like punishment. You're doing the right thing, but nothing is moving. You're praying, showing up, staying faithful, but the fruit isn't visible yet. And in those moments, the temptation to detour is real. You start looking for shortcuts. You wonder if you should lower your standards. You question whether obedience is actually working, but the reason it feels so heavy isn't because you're off track. It's because you're carrying something significant. Destiny isn't light, it's weighty. And the longer God takes to build you, the stronger the foundation he's preparing. Provision doesn't just mean money or opportunities. It also means wisdom, divine connections, clarity, emotional capacity, spiritual strength, and favor that no human can manufacture. That's why God often slows things down, not to frustrate you, but to fortify you. Because once he releases you into your next season, it will come with influence, visibility, and impact. And if your character isn't ready to support that weight, the pressure will pull you out of alignment. So this season of waiting, stretching, trusting, it's not wasted. It's necessary, it's sacred, it's the soil where unshakable faith is planted. There's a moment in the life of David that perfectly captures this. He was anointed as king while still a shepherd, called long before he was crowned. And in between the calling and the fulfillment, there were years of running, hiding, trusting, and learning how to lead when no one was watching. If he had stepped into power before learning how to surrender, he would have led from ego, not obedience. But because he allowed purpose to lead the process, provision followed him. God surrounded him with mighty men, gave him favor with tribes, opened doors that no man could close. Not because David forced it, but because he flowed in timing. That same principle is true for you. You're not forgotten. You're not overlooked. You're not disqualified. You're being prepared, refined, positioned. And when the moment comes, it will not be late. It will be perfect. You won't have to beg for it. You won't have to strive. You'll step into it with grace, clarity, and supernatural momentum. But until that moment, your job is simple. Stay aligned. Stay anchored in purpose. Keep showing up with integrity when no one's clapping. Keep obeying when it's inconvenient. Keep building when the resources seem small. because what feels invisible right now is producing weight in the spirit. And when God says it's time, everything will shift. So let me ask you, have you been feeling like you're behind? Have you been measuring your progress by the wrong standards? Maybe it's time to flip the script and say, I'm not behind, I'm being positioned. If this word is confirming something in your spirit today, take a moment and drop a comment below. Write that phrase, speak it over your own life, or share what season you're walking through, because someone else might be in the same space and need to know they're not alone. Let's keep building this together, one purpose-aligned step at a time. Topic 10. Delay is not denial. When God seems silent, He's actually strategizing. There's a kind of silence that feels like abandonment. You pray and nothing happens. You knock and no door opens. You do everything you know to do. Read the word, worship, wait, obey, and yet the breakthrough doesn't come. It's in this space, in the middle of obedience and outcome, where your faith gets stretched the most. And if you're not careful, you'll start confusing delay with denial. You'll start believing the lie that because God hasn't moved yet, maybe He never will. But the truth is far more powerful and far more personal. When God seems silent, He's not ignoring you. He's strategizing for you. He's not just preparing the blessing, He's preparing you for the blessing. Because a gift given too soon can destroy the one who receives it. What feels like a pause is often a layer of divine protection. God sees what you can't. He sees the traps the enemy has laid. He sees the hearts of people around you. He sees the timing of the open doors and the weight of the calling you're about to carry. And rather than rush you into something half-built, He slows everything down just enough to strengthen what you can't see, your roots, your resilience, your wisdom, your discernment. But that doesn't make it easier in the moment. Waiting tests every part of you. It confronts your impatience, your insecurity, your desire to prove yourself. It exposes the places where you've equated God's love with His speed, and it reveals whether you're following Him for the outcome or for who He is. Because if your faith can only survive quick answers and immediate results, then it's not faith, it's preference. Real faith is forged in the delay, in the tension, in the mystery. When nothing looks like it's working, and you still say, God, I trust you. Think of Joseph, called through a dream, favored by his father, full of purpose, and then sold by his brothers, falsely accused, imprisoned, forgotten. It would have been easy for him to assume that the delay was a denial of the dream. But what Joseph didn't see was that while he sat in the waiting room of disappointment, God was orchestrating something far bigger. He was putting people in place, moving pieces behind the scenes, building a pathway to Pharaoh's palace. The very prison Joseph was stuck in became the platform for his promotion. But he didn't know that in the moment. All he had was a dream, a God he refused to stop trusting, and the character to stay faithful when nothing made sense. That's the power of divine delay. It humbles you, it anchors you, it trains your spiritual ears to recognize God's whisper over the noise of your emotions. Because if you only trust God when things go your way, then your trust isn't in Him, it's in your plan. But when you trust Him in the silence, in the confusion, in the moments when you feel forgotten, that's when your roots go deep. That's when your faith grows mature. That's when heaven starts to take notice, because obedience in the silence speaks louder than worship in the spotlight. Sometimes God delays the thing you want most, not to punish you, but to protect the purity of your heart. If He gave it to you now, would you forget Him? Would you idolize the gift instead of the giver? Would you trade intimacy for influence? That's why the delay is not about the dream, it's about your development. He's not just interested in what you do, He's shaping who you become. Because who you are when the promise shows up determines whether you can carry it well or collapse under its weight. And yes, there are times when the silence makes you question everything, but maybe that's the point. Maybe God allows the silence not to distance Himself, but to draw you deeper. So you'll stop depending on the applause of others. So you'll stop measuring your worth by your productivity, So you'll stop seeing prayer as a transaction and start seeing it as a lifeline. That kind of closeness can't be built on convenience. It's born in seasons where you have nothing left but faith. And even that faith feels fragile. But to God, that's more than enough. So if you're in a waiting season right now, if the delay feels endless and your heart is starting to wonder if God even hears you, I want to remind you, you are not forgotten. You are not behind. You are not abandoned. You are being positioned for something greater than you can imagine. And when the time comes, when the page finally turns, when the silence breaks, it will be undeniable that God was in it the whole time. If this spoke to you, if you've been wrestling with the wait, I want you to share it in the comments. You could write something like, "The delay is part of the plan," or "God, I'll trust you even in the silence." And if you're comfortable, share how long you've been waiting. It might encourage someone who's feeling the same thing. Let's remind each other that silence doesn't mean absence. It often means strategy. And what God is building in you right now is preparing you for something bigger than the delay itself. Topic 11. The fight you don't see. How spiritual warfare tries to silence your calling. There are moments in your journey when the resistance feels invisible but undeniable. You can't explain it, but you feel it, like a fog over your clarity, a pressure in your chest, a weight that refuses to lift no matter how much you rest. You start wondering if it's just burnout or bad timing, but deep in your spirit, something whispers that there's more going on beneath the surface. And that whisper is right. Because what many people don't realize is that when you step into purpose, when you begin to align with God's voice and walk in kingdom authority, you become a threat. And threats get targeted, not by flesh and blood, but by spiritual forces designed to distract, discourage, sleep. He goes after those who are waking up, those who are starting to break cycles, speak truth, break generational curses, carry light into dark places. That's why the warfare increases when you're closest to breakthrough. That's why confusion suddenly hits when you start gaining momentum. That's why the moments of greatest obedience are often followed by the fiercest battles. Because the moment you stop living on autopilot and start walking with intention, you expose territory the enemy thought he could keep. But here's what you have to remember. Spiritual warfare isn't always loud. It's not always demons in the room or nightmares in the night. Sometimes it's subtle. It shows up as extreme fatigue that hits right before you're supposed to take a bold step. It looks like sudden relational tension that pulls your focus away from your assignment. It comes as doubt wrapped in logic, fear wrapped in caution, distraction disguised as opportunity. It's warfare that sounds like your own thoughts, but they aren't coming from the Father's voice. And if you're not discerning, you'll internalize the attack instead of resisting it. That's what the enemy wants. He wants you to think it's just you, just your weakness, just your lack of discipline, just your emotions being unstable. But what if it's not just you? What if it's a coordinated attempt to drain your passion before you finish what God started? What if it's not about what you're doing wrong, but about what you're doing right? Because when you start pulling people out of darkness, when your words start carrying weight in the spirit, when your obedience starts shifting atmospheres, you're no longer just a believer, you're a carrier of glory. And darkness doesn't just watch that happen without trying to push back. That's why Paul wrote about putting on the full armor of God, not as a metaphor, but as a daily reality. Because you can't fight a spiritual war with human tools. You can't overcome discouragement by just thinking positive. You can't silence spiritual confusion with motivational quotes. You need the word. You need worship that shifts atmospheres. You need intercession that tears down strongholds. You need stillness that reconnects you to the presence of God when everything else feels loud. This isn't superstition, it's strategy. And if you don't understand that you're in a war, you'll start fighting the wrong enemies, people, institutions, even yourself. But here's the good news. You're not fighting for victory. You're fighting from victory. Jesus already defeated the powers of darkness. The enemy has no legal authority over your life unless you agree with his lies. And that's why he targets your mind, because that's where agreement begins. If he can get you to believe you're not qualified, not anointed, not ready, then he can make you step back without ever using force. But when you recognize the pattern, when you lift your eyes and say, wait a minute, this heaviness is not from God, everything starts to shift. You stop shrinking, you stop apologizing, you stop trying to blend in, and you start standing in the authority that Jesus already gave you. This fight is real, but so is your anointing, so is your assignment, so is the power of the Spirit that lives in you. And you weren't called to just survive spiritual warfare. You were called to overcome it and help others do the same. That's why your discernment matters. That's why your obedience matters. That's why your consistency, even when no one sees it, carries eternal weight. You don't need to fear the battle when you know who's fighting for you. You just need to stay alert, stay grounded, and stay in agreement with the voice of truth, not the voice of fear. And if this is resonating right now, if you're starting to see the patterns, starting to realize that what you've been feeling isn't random, I want to hear from you. Scroll down and leave a comment. Maybe write something like, I see the battle, but I choose to stand, or I will not shrink back. You don't have to explain everything, but even a sentence could remind someone else that they're not crazy. They're just under attack for stepping into purpose. Let's call it what it is and keep moving forward with authority. Topic 12. When the wilderness becomes the classroom, God teaches in hidden places. There's a place most people try to avoid. It's not glamorous. It's not loud. There are no crowds cheering you on, no spotlight, no recognition, just silence, stillness, uncertainty. And yet it's in this very place, the wilderness, where God often does his deepest work. The wilderness isn't punishment, it's preparation. It's where character is forged, clarity is formed, and identity is revealed. And if you're in that season right now, where nothing seems to be moving, where your prayers feel like echoes, where the dream is alive but buried under dust, what if I told you this isn't a detour? What if it's the curriculum of heaven? The wilderness is the classroom of the called. Not the comfortable, not the casual, but the chosen. It's where God removes the noise so you can finally hear what actually matters, where he strips away your titles, your coping mechanisms, your distractions, until all that's left is raw dependency. And while the world sees that as weakness, the kingdom sees it as a weapon, because what you learn in hidden places becomes the authority you carry in public ones. Jesus himself didn't skip this process. Before he performed miracles, before he stepped into public ministry, he was led by the Spirit into the wilderness. Not by the enemy, by the Spirit. Because sometimes isolation is an invitation. It's in the wilderness where your identity gets tested. Not just what you do, but who you are. You start asking deeper questions. Do I believe God is still with me when I don't feel him? Do I still trust his voice when I haven't heard it in weeks? Am I doing this for applause or for alignment? And these questions don't always get easy answers. Sometimes they sit with you for a while, but that sitting, that wrestling, is part of the shaping. Because before God releases you into your assignment, he always makes sure you're rooted in truth, not hype, not emotion, but truth that holds when the storms hit. The wilderness exposes false attachments, things you thought you needed but never did. People who looked loyal but were only seasonal. Opportunities that glittered but weren't God. And when those things fall away, it hurts. But that pain is also pruning. And pruning always comes before fruitfulness. You cannot carry the weight of your calling while dragging the dead branches of the past. That's why the wilderness isn't just about surviving, it's about becoming someone who can be trusted with more, someone who won't compromise when pressure comes, someone who knows how to stand in purpose without getting intoxicated by the platform. And while you're there, something sacred happens. You start hearing God in ways you never noticed before, not because he speaks louder, but because your ears are finally tuned in. You begin to realize that the stillness isn't empty, it's full of subtle signs. A scripture that won't let you go, a moment of peace in the middle of tears, a song that hits you differently, a sunset that speaks to your soul. These aren't coincidences. They're conversations. God hasn't gone silent, he's just shifted the frequency. And the wilderness is where you learn how to tune your heart to it. But make no mistake, the enemy loves to attack in the wilderness too. He shows up not with force, but with questions. The same way he approached Jesus. If you really are the Son of God, that's how he still works. He attacks your identity when you're isolated. He whispers lies in your most vulnerable moments. He plants seeds of doubt, hoping you'll water them with your fear. That's why knowing the word isn't optional in this season, it's essential. Jesus didn't defeat the enemy with emotions, he defeated him with truth. And that truth didn't just show up when he needed it, it was already hidden in his heart. If you're in a wilderness season, you need to know this. You're not off course, you're not being punished, you're being prepared. God hasn't forgotten you. He's forming you, and what he forms in private will sustain you in public. You might feel unseen, but heaven sees every step, every tear, every quiet yes, every moment you chose to stay faithful even when no one was watching. And when this season shifts, and it will, you'll carry something that can't be shaken, not because you avoided the wilderness, but because you graduated from it. So take a breath, look around, ask yourself, what is God trying to teach me here? What is he breaking off me, and what is he building in me? And if this message is stirring something in you, I want to invite you to engage. Scroll down and leave a comment. You can write something like, "The wilderness is where I'm becoming," or "God is teaching me in the silence." Share a glimpse of what you've been walking through, because someone else might be there too, and your words could become their confirmation that they're not alone in the process. Topic 13. You're not waiting on God, he's waiting on your yes. There's a moment in every journey of faith where it hits you. The delay, the silence, the sense of waiting isn't because God is withholding something. It's because somewhere deep down, you haven't fully surrendered your yes. Not a partial yes, not a conditional yes, not a yes if everything makes sense, but a complete, surrendered, no turning back kind of yes. And while you might be asking God to move, he's actually waiting for that moment. The moment when you stop negotiating and start trusting, when you stop trying to control the narrative and say, "God, I don't need all the answers. I just want to walk in obedience." The truth is, many of us are praying prayers we're not ready to live out. We ask for clarity but avoid responsibility. We beg for purpose but fear the sacrifice that comes with it. We say we want breakthrough, but hesitate to let go of what's familiar. And God, in his mercy, waits, not because he's punishing us, but because he won't force you into destiny. He'll invite you, he'll prompt you, he'll stir your spirit. But the decision to move, that's on you, because your calling isn't just activated by prayer, it's activated by permission, and that permission flows from your yes. This is what so many people miss. They think they're in a holding pattern because God is still preparing the opportunity. But the truth is, God is often ready before you are. He already aligned the connections. He already opened the doors. He already whispered the strategy. But he's waiting for your trust to match your prayers. He's waiting for your obedience to match your declarations, because heaven doesn't respond to wishful thinking. It responds to faith-filled movement. And sometimes, the only thing standing between you and the next level is your reluctance to let go of the last one. Maybe you've been clinging to comfort, to what's predictable, to the version of your life that still feels safe, even if it's slowly killing your purpose. Maybe you've been saying, "God, speak," but every time he does, it requires something that scares you. A step of boldness, a conversation you've been avoiding, a project you've been putting off. A decision that might cost you approval, resources, or reputation. And so you delay, you wait, you say it's not the right time, but deep down you know it's not about timing anymore. It's about willingness. God never asks for perfection. He asks for permission. He's not looking for people who have it all figured out. He's looking for hearts that are willing to say yes before they see how. That's the kind of faith that moves heaven. That's the kind of surrender that shifts atmospheres. When Mary received the word that she would carry the Messiah, she didn't demand a 5-step plan. She simply said, "Let it be unto me according to your word." That was her yes, and it changed everything. Your yes doesn't have to be loud, but it does have to be real. It has to come from a place that says, even if I'm afraid, I'll move. Even if I don't have all the resources, I'll start. Even if I feel unqualified, I'll step forward. That kind of yes attracts supernatural favor. It releases provision. It accelerates alignment, because now you're no longer trying to convince God to do something for you. You're partnering with what He already designed for you. And in that space of obedience, doors swing open that effort could never force. But let's be honest, saying yes will cost you something. It might cost you relationships that don't support your growth. It might cost you the version of yourself that's attached to old cycles and small thinking. It might cost you temporary security in exchange for long-term surrender. But what you gain in return is beyond measure. You gain clarity because your steps are now ordered. You gain peace because you're no longer divided between calling and comfort. You gain momentum because obedience always accelerates what you were trying to push in your own strength. So maybe it's time to stop asking God to show up and start asking yourself, have I really said yes? Have I given Him access to every room in my life, or just the ones I'm comfortable sharing? Have I handed Him the pen and let Him write the story, or am I still clinging to the script I wrote in fear? Because the moment your yes becomes full, the weight begins to break. Movement starts happening. The fog begins to lift. The provision you thought was missing shows up, not because God suddenly decided to bless you, but because you finally positioned yourself to receive it. If this message is confirming something in your heart, if you feel like this was the Holy Spirit putting a mirror in front of your soul, I want to invite you to engage. Scroll down and drop a comment. You can write something simple like, "God, you have my yes," or "I'm ready to move." Or share a decision you've been holding off on, because your boldness might be the breakthrough someone else needs to see. Let's not just talk about surrender. Let's live it. Let's release the hesitation and give God the yes He's been waiting for. Topic 14. Many want the reward, but few want the refining. One of the most sobering truths about walking with God is that everyone wants the reward, but very few are willing to embrace the refining. We love the idea of destiny, of walking in our calling, of stepping into favor and influence and supernatural provision. But we often forget that the version of us standing in front of the promise can't carry it yet. There are parts of us that still need to be stripped away, mindsets that need to be broken, patterns that need to be uprooted. And God, in His mercy, will not give us something that will destroy us. So before the reward, there is always the fire, the refining fire, not to punish, but to purify. And this is where many people turn back, because refinement doesn't feel glamorous. It doesn't always make sense. It often feels like loss, like confusion, like contradiction. You say yes to God and expect doors to open, but instead you get delay. You step into obedience expecting celebration, but instead you face silence. And in those moments, the temptation is to believe that something went wrong. But the truth is, something's going right. Because fire always comes before glory. The crushing always comes before the oil. The cross always comes before the crown. What God is doing in the refining is not just about changing your circumstances, it's about changing you. He's stripping off the layers of pride, fear, insecurity, self-reliance, approval addiction. He's exposing the places where your identity is still rooted in performance instead of presence. And He's doing it not to shame you, but to free you. Because if He doesn't refine you now, the very thing you've been praying for could become the weight that crushes you later. Influence without identity is dangerous. Visibility without maturity is a trap. And favor without foundation can turn into failure. So the refining is not a delay of your destiny, it's the construction site of your character. Think of the potter and the clay. The clay doesn't get to decide how long it sits on the wheel. It doesn't get to dictate the pressure or the shaping or the heat of the kiln, but the potter knows. The potter sees the end from the beginning, and every squeeze, every spin, every burn is designed with one goal in mind: to form something beautiful, useful, unshakable. That's what God is doing in your life. It may feel like chaos right now, but there's a design in the process. There's precision in the pressure, and if you resist it, you'll delay the beauty that's being built in the brokenness. Refining often feels like isolation, like being hidden while others are being promoted, like being passed over, left behind, forgotten. But what if you're not being forgotten? What if you're being forged? What if the hidden place is where God is guarding you from premature exposure, from the wrong voices, from stepping into something too soon? So many people are in a rush to be seen, but God hides those He loves, not to withhold, but to protect. Because when you're refined in secret, you can stand in public without crumbling under pressure. There are prayers you've prayed that require a stronger version of you to carry the answer. There are doors God has already prepared, but He's preparing you before He opens them, because you don't just walk into promise, you become the person who can sustain it. That's why the refining season matters. It's where strength is born. Not emotional hype, not religious performance, but real, quiet, deep-rooted strength that doesn't shake when life gets loud. It's in the fire that you discover what's gold and what's just glitter, and God is committed to bringing the gold out of you. But here's the part that takes the most faith. Refining is rarely announced. There's no banner that says, "You're in the refining season." It just feels like everything is being shaken, like things are being taken away, like you're being emptied out. And in those moments, the enemy will whisper lies. "See, God's not with you. You messed up. You missed it. You're going backwards." But those are just distractions to keep you from seeing the truth. That you're not being punished, you're being prepared. And that preparation is sacred, it's holy. It's the evidence that heaven still has its hand on your life. So here's what I want you to ask yourself right now. Have I been resisting the refining because it's uncomfortable? Have I mistaken God's fire for His absence? Have I prayed for the reward, but avoided the process that leads to it? Because the moment you shift your perspective, the fire loses its fear. You stop running from it and start walking through it, knowing that what's being burned away wasn't meant to stay. You realize that on the other side of this season is a strength you didn't know you had, a clarity you've been praying for, and a capacity that will carry you into rooms your old self never could have survived. If this spoke to your soul today, if you feel like God is refining you in ways that don't make sense, I want you to do something brave. Scroll down and drop a comment. Say something like, "Refining is part of my story," or "God, keep molding me." You don't need to explain everything, but your willingness to be honest might set someone else free. Let's remind each other that we're not being burned, we're being built. And this fire is not the end. It's just the beginning of something sacred. After all the waiting, the refining, the hidden seasons, the battles no one saw, the moments of surrender you thought no one noticed, there's one final truth that ties it all together. Everything you've been searching for is found when you truly put Him first, not just in theory, not just with words, but in lifestyle, in daily choices, in heart posture. Because Jesus didn't say, "Add me to your plans and I'll bless them." He said, "Seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things will be added to you." It's not a suggestion, it's a spiritual law, a divine strategy that reorders everything. And most people miss it, not because they don't want God, but because they don't trust Him enough to let go of their backup plans. We say we want to follow Jesus, but we often still want to keep control. We tithe, but only when the budget allows. We obey, but only when it doesn't cost too much. We trust, but only until the pressure gets heavy, and then we slip into survival mode. We hustle, we calculate, we strive, all while still praying for peace, still asking for breakthrough, still wondering why things feel stuck. But the truth is, God doesn't bless mixture. He blesses surrender, not because he's harsh, but because mixture brings instability, and you can't build a kingdom life on a foundation of divided loyalty. Putting him first isn't just about putting church on your schedule. It's about putting his voice above your own desires. It's about aligning your decisions with his values, even when it costs you popularity, opportunity, or speed. It's about choosing integrity when compromise would be easier, choosing stillness when rushing would feel more productive, choosing trust when fear is screaming for control. And the beauty of it is this: the moment you truly put him first, everything else finds its place. Not all at once, not without challenges, but with divine order that starts to govern your life. When you put him first, you stop chasing what he already promised to give. You stop trying to make things happen in your strength and start moving in rhythm with his grace. Provision becomes natural. Connections become purposeful. Even the closed doors start to make sense. Because now you can see they weren't rejections, they were redirections. You stop living in reaction to the world and start living in response to his whisper. And that's when peace floods in. Not the kind that disappears when circumstances change, but the kind that anchors your soul regardless of what's happening around you. There's a clarity that comes with kingdom first living. It filters your motives. It purifies your ambition. It exposes the idols you didn't know you were bowing to, and it invites you into a deeper kind of success, one that isn't measured by numbers, but by impact, by obedience, by faithfulness in the small things. Because in the kingdom, what's small in the world's eyes is often massive in heaven's economy. That private yes, that quiet act of generosity, that unseen sacrifice, that moment you chose love when offense would have been easier. Those are the moments that build eternal legacy. But this only happens when Jesus is more than a part of your life, when he becomes the center of it. When every decision, every dream, every resource, every opportunity gets filtered through the question, does this honor the King? And when you start living like that, you'll notice something shift, not just around you, but within you. The striving dies down, the fear loses its grip, the pressure to prove yourself fades, because now you're not chasing validation, you're walking in identity, you're not reacting to the pressure of culture, you're responding to the pace of heaven. Putting God first doesn't mean life gets easier, but it does mean life gets aligned, and alignment is what unlocks acceleration. When you're in the right position, the right things begin to find you. Not because you forced them, but because you made room for them. And that's the key. Seeking him first doesn't always add more to your life. Sometimes it strips things away. But whatever it removes, it always replaces with better, with peace, with direction, with strength that doesn't run dry. Because you're no longer building your life around the world's expectations. You're building it around the King's assignment. So right now, wherever you are, whatever season you're in, I want to ask you one question. Is he really first? Not just on Sundays, not just when it's easy, but in the hidden moments, in the pressure, in the waiting, in the decisions no one else sees. Because that's where the real shift happens. That's where kingdom living becomes more than a concept. It becomes a reality. And that's where your life starts to reflect what you were created for all along. If this part of the message is speaking straight into your heart, if something inside you is saying, this is what I've been missing, then take a second and let your voice be heard. Scroll down and drop a comment. You could write, I choose to put God first, or everything changes with alignment, or just share how this word helped you refocus today. Because someone else might be scrolling, looking for clarity, and your boldness might be the sign they've been waiting for. Let's build this space together on truth, surrender, and a King who never fails. After everything we've walked through, The fire, the silence, the waiting, the refining, the wilderness, the hard yes, and the alignment. There's one more truth that so many people still wrestle with, a truth that keeps them from stepping fully into the freedom Jesus offers. And it's this: God is not looking for perfection. He never was. He's looking for hearts that are fully surrendered, yet we keep trying to earn what can only be received. We carry this silent pressure to get it all right, to pray more, do more, be more. And we convince ourselves that if we just perform better, maybe then we'll be worthy. Maybe then the breakthrough will come. Maybe then we'll finally feel qualified. But that's not the way the kingdom works. The invitation of Jesus was never be perfect before you come. It was, come to me, all who are weary. He didn't ask for cleaned up resumes. He didn't recruit based on spiritual achievements. He called broken fishermen, rejected tax collectors, unstable zealots, and women with messy pasts. And he didn't fix them before using them. He walked with them while transforming them. That's grace. That's the love we so often preach, but rarely allow ourselves to fully receive. Because somewhere in our minds, we still think we have to earn what was freely given. The trap of performance is subtle. It disguises itself as discipline. It hides behind the mask of excellence, but it's driven by fear, not love. Fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of not being enough. And so we strive. We exhaust ourselves trying to meet a standard God never placed on us. We confuse conviction with condemnation. We measure ourselves by our struggles instead of our surrender. And the enemy uses that shame to keep us stuck close to the presence of God, but never fully confident in it. Always worshiping, but never fully resting. Always seeking, but never quite believing that we're already seen. But the cross changed everything. Jesus didn't die so we could spend the rest of our lives trying to earn what he paid for in full. He died so we could live free. Free from shame, free from self-hate, free from the pressure to perform. He didn't say, "It is started." He said, "It is finished." And when you really let that truth settle in your soul, you stop trying to be impressive and you start being intimate. You stop striving and start surrendering. You stop editing your prayers to sound holy and start being honest. Because God isn't impressed by your performance. He's moved by your authenticity. It's the surrendered heart that catches heaven's attention. The one that says, "God, I don't have it all together, but I'm still here." The one that says, "I'm tired, but I won't quit." The one that says, "I messed up, but I still believe you're not done with me." That kind of honesty creates space for God to do what only He can do. Because as long as you pretend to have it all together, you'll never let Him touch the parts that are still bleeding. And healing can't happen in places you hide. David wasn't called a man after God's heart because he was perfect. Far from it. He made mistakes that would have disqualified him in today's standards, but he kept coming back, kept repenting, kept humbling himself, kept surrendering again and again. And that's what God saw. Not the flaw, but the hunger. Not the failure, but the softness of heart. Because God can work with a heart that's open. He can rebuild what's broken. He can redirect what's gone off course. He can redeem what the world said was ruined. But He waits for surrender, not perfection. So if you've been feeling disqualified, like you've missed your chance, like your mistakes have marked you, like you'll never measure up, I want to tell you plainly, that voice is not from God. That's shame talking. That's fear lying. That's religion twisting truth into something it was never meant to be. God never needed your perfection. He just wants your heart. The messy, beautiful, honest, surrendered heart that says, "Here I am, Lord, use me anyway." And maybe that's what today is about. Maybe this is your moment, not to impress God, but to let Him in. Not to perform better, but to rest deeper. Not to try harder, but to trust more fully. Because in the kingdom, your weakness is not a liability, it's an invitation. an invitation for his strength to be made perfect in you, an invitation to step into grace that doesn't just cover you but empowers you, an invitation to finally breathe and believe that being fully his is better than being falsely flawless. If this message spoke straight to your heart today, if something in you feels lighter just hearing it, then I want to invite you to respond. Scroll down and leave a comment. You could write, "God doesn't need my perfection, he wants my heart," or "I choose surrender over performance," or just share what part of this helped you breathe again. Because there's someone else watching who feels the same weight, and your words might be the reminder they need that they're not alone and they are still fully loved. There's a space not many people talk about, not because it's irrelevant, but because it's hidden. It's not flashy. It doesn't come with applause or recognition. It's not shared in highlight reels or talked about in viral clips. But this place, though unseen, is where battles are won. It's where burdens are lifted. It's where clarity is restored, strength is renewed, and identity is revealed. It's where the loud chaos of life gets silenced by the stillness of presence. It's where power is born, not the kind the world gives, but the kind that only heaven imparts. This place is what Scripture calls the secret place, and everything begins to shift when you learn to live from it. Most people are exhausted because they're trying to live public lives without a private well. They're pouring out without ever getting poured into. They're fighting battles in front of others without first being fortified in the presence of God. They're chasing clarity, peace, direction, and provision, but ignoring the very space where all of that flows. And that's exactly how the enemy likes it. Busy Christians doing all the right things, but disconnected from intimacy. Because the enemy knows he can't steal your calling. So he'll do everything he can to keep you too distracted or too discouraged to access the place where your calling gets fueled. The secret place is not a religious ritual. It's not about how many chapters you read or how many words you say in prayer. It's about presence, real presence. It's about coming before God not to impress him, but to encounter him, to strip away the noise, the performance, the pressure, and just be. It's where you're fully known and fully loved, where you don't have to be strong, where you don't have to be right, where you don't have to prove anything. It's where masks fall and tears flow and healing begins, not on a stage but in the stillness. Because the secret place is not about productivity, it's about intimacy. Jesus modeled this perfectly. He often withdrew to lonely places to pray, not because he was weak, but because he was wise. He understood something most of us miss. What happens in private sustains what you carry in public. You can't cast out demons, speak life, walk in compassion, discern truth, carry power, and stay grounded in love if you're not rooted in communion with the Father. Ministry without intimacy leads to burnout. Leadership without quiet time leads to pride. Purpose without presence leads to performance. But when you anchor yourself in the secret place, you start to live from overflow, not empty striving. And here's the beautiful part. The secret place is not far. It's not locked away in some distant spiritual realm. It's as close as your next breath. The moment you choose to turn your attention inward, to quiet your soul, to lean into his whisper, to lay down your agenda, you're there. Heaven draws near. Peace starts flowing. Perspective shifts. Not because your circumstances have changed, but because you have. Because in that place, you're reminded that you're not alone, that you're not behind, that you're not forgotten, that the King of Kings still knows your name, sees your heart, and meets you exactly where you are. This is where secrets are revealed, not the kind that entertain, but the kind that transform. God begins to uncover lies you didn't know you were living under. He rewrites narratives you picked up from trauma or culture or comparison. He realigns your desires so they no longer chase empty validation, but eternal purpose. He whispers strategy for the next step. Sometimes it's not even about hearing anything new. It's about letting him heal what's still bleeding, soothe what's still anxious, and remind you who you are in him before you try to be anything for anyone else. Some of the greatest spiritual breakthroughs don't happen in conferences or crusades. They happen on the floor, in silence, behind closed doors, where no one is watching but heaven. And yet, the fruit of those moments becomes undeniable. Suddenly you carry peace where you used to carry panic. You walk in authority instead of anxiety. You no longer need constant affirmation because you've been affirmed by the one who matters most. You no longer chase open doors because now you trust that what's yours can't be missed. And when you speak, there's weight. When you move, there's grace. Because everything public begins in the private. And maybe that's what's been missing. Maybe the breakthrough isn't delayed, it's waiting for you in the secret place. Maybe the clarity you've been begging for is found not in doing more, but in getting still. Maybe the strength you're lacking isn't about rest or routine, it's about reconnecting with the one who is your source. The one who never asked you to perform, the one who never required perfection, the one who just wants to sit with you, walk with you, and whisper truth over you until every lie breaks and every fear bows. If this part of the message stirred something in your spirit, if you know God is calling you back to the secret place, don't ignore it. Let today be the moment you return. And if you feel led, I'd love for you to scroll down and drop a comment. You could write, "I'm returning to the secret place," or "Everything changes in His presence," or share what this message awakened in you, because your vulnerability might be the sign someone else needs to step back into stillness and into strength. After all the seeking, all the surrender, all the pressing in and pouring out, there comes a moment in your journey where a holy shift begins to happen deep in your spirit. You stop asking just for answers. You stop striving just for clarity. You stop approaching God as a means to an end, and you begin to realize that His presence is the prize, not just what it produces, not the miracles, not the provision, not the promotion, not the fulfillment of your calling. All of those things are beautiful, and yes, they matter, but none of them compare to simply being with Him, to knowing Him, to walking so closely with the Father that even if nothing around you changes, your heart remains fully at peace. This is what Moses understood when he said to God, "If your presence does not go with us, do not send us up from here." He had tasted the miraculous. He had seen plagues fall, seas split, and enemies fall by the hand of the Lord. But he wasn't addicted to the outcome. He was anchored to the presence. He wasn't chasing results. He was pursuing relationship. And that's what made him different. That's what caused his face to shine. That's what gave him the boldness to lead a people through the wilderness. He didn't move unless the presence moved. So many people are tired not because of the battles they're fighting, but because they've unknowingly made the blessing the goal. They've put all their faith in the outcome, and when it delays or looks different than expected, they spiral. They begin to doubt, to retreat, to feel like God has failed them. But the truth is, God never promised that life would be predictable. He promised that His presence would never leave. And the moment we begin to treat His presence like the ultimate gift instead of a bonus, everything starts to change. The anxiety begins to lift. The pressure begins to dissolve. Because when God becomes the reward, the results stop ruling your emotions. There's a kind of peace that the world cannot replicate. It's not circumstantial. It's not based on how well things are going. It's the kind that follows you into the fire and says, "I know who walks with me." It's the kind that holds your heart steady when everything else is shifting. That peace only comes from nearness to God, not knowledge about Him, not activity for Him, but closeness with Him. It's intimacy, and intimacy is built when you stop rushing your time with Him, when you stop treating prayer like a transaction and start treating it like communion. It's when your worship isn't just a song, it's a posture, a life, a breath. And here's what's wild. When you truly start valuing the presence of God above all else, the fruit you were once striving for often begins to show up naturally, not because you forced it, but because you made space for it. You aligned yourself with heaven, and heaven flows where there's surrender. When your heart becomes the altar, fire always falls. Not always in the form you expect, not always in the timeline you wanted, but always with purpose, always with presence. And the weight of that glory cannot be replicated anywhere else. Sometimes we ask, God, what are you doing? And his response is, I'm trying to get you to want me more than you want the answer. Because his presence isn't a stepping stone to something greater. It is the greatest thing. Everything else, gifts, assignments, seasons, platforms, influence, flows from this one holy obsession, him, his voice, his nearness, his heart. When that becomes your center, you become unshakable. Not because you're strong, but because your roots are deep. Deep in truth, deep in love, deep in presence. You don't have to chase open doors when you've already found the one who opens them. You don't have to beg for breakthrough when your heart is already anchored in the breaker. That's the beauty of intimacy. It removes the striving and replaces it with stillness, not passivity, but peace-filled movement. You begin to walk in rhythm with heaven. You begin to discern what matters and what doesn't. You stop chasing timelines and start living in trust. Because the one you walk with knows how to get you where you're meant to go, and more importantly, who you're meant to become along the way. And maybe, just maybe, this is the reminder your soul needed today. That it's okay to stop chasing. It's okay to sit down for a moment, to close the tabs in your mind, to lay the goals on the altar, and just say, Jesus, I want you. If I never get the platform, if the promise takes longer than I expected, if the doors don't open the way I hoped, you are still enough. That kind of heart posture shakes the spiritual realm. It breaks chains you didn't even know were holding you. It heals places in you that no achievement ever could. So if this part of the journey is speaking straight into your soul, I want to invite you to pause and reflect. And when you're ready, drop a comment below. Write something like, your presence is the prize, or I choose intimacy over outcomes, or just share how this message shifted your perspective today. You never know, your moment of honesty might lead someone else back to the only place where true rest is found, the presence of the King. There's a part of your journey that doesn't always feel fair, a season that's hard to explain. It's not that things are going wrong, it's just that nothing seems to be happening. You're doing the right things, saying yes to God, walking in obedience, and yet it feels like you've been placed on pause. No doors opening, no opportunities presenting themselves, no breakthroughs in sight. And in that stillness, in that silence, in that invisibility, it's easy to question what God is doing. But what if he's not ignoring you? What if he's hiding you? Not as a punishment, but as a divine strategy. Because in the kingdom, before God sets you in place, he sets you apart. This is the part of the process that rarely gets talked about, because it's not glamorous. It doesn't come with applause. There are no lights, no accolades, no visible progress. Just you and God and the quiet. And while the world celebrates being seen, heaven values being shaped. The hiding place is where the deep work happens, where your identity is refined, where your character is strengthened, where your foundation is built so strong that when God does elevate you, you won't crumble under the weight of it. You won't be crushed by the expectations, because you've already been crushed in the secret place, in the hidden place, where the oil was pressed and the ego was broken. Being hidden doesn't mean you're being held back. It means you're being held close. It means God is jealous for your attention. He's pulling you out of noise so he can pour himself into you. So he can whisper things to you that can't be spoken in crowds. So he can heal places in you that would be exposed if you stepped out too soon. Because while the world pushes people to perform, God pulls his children into presence. And there are certain things that can only be learned in the shadows, lessons that lights and platforms will never teach you. Jesus himself was hidden for 30 years before he stepped into public ministry. 30 years of silence. 30 years of no miracles, no crowds, no stage. But it wasn't wasted time, it was preparation. The Son of God, the Savior of the world, chose to be hidden. Why? Because there's a kind of strength, a kind of humility, a kind of obedience that only grows in the soil of obscurity. And if Jesus needed it, how much more do we? We want acceleration, but God wants formation. And formation takes time. It takes privacy. It takes surrender when no one is watching and no one is clapping. But here's the part we often miss. Being hidden is not the same as being stuck. Stuck feels like confusion. Hidden feels like covering. Stuck is what happens when we refuse to move. Hidden is what happens when God tells us to wait. And that wait is not passive, it's active, it's holy. It's the place where roots grow deep, where vision gets refined, where the noise of the world dies down so the voice of God can grow louder. And once you've tasted that intimacy, you'll start to realize that visibility is not the goal, intimacy is. Because what good is being seen by the world if you're not known by heaven? The season of hiding is sacred because it reveals your motives. When no one is watching, will you still worship? When no one is applauding, will you still be faithful? When no one notices your gift, will you still develop it in private? That's what sets apart those who are called from those who are merely ambitious. Ambition pushes you into places your character isn't ready to hold. But when you've been hidden, when you've been refined, when you've been stripped of the need to be seen, you don't seek platforms, you steward presence. You don't chase influence, you cultivate intimacy. And God can trust you with more because you're no longer performing, you're carrying something real. Sometimes, the reason you haven't been released yet is because the old, you can't go where He's taking you. The insecure you, the approval-hungry you, the impatient you, that version of you is being buried in the secret place so that a new version can emerge. One that's rooted, one that's ready, one that doesn't need the spotlight to feel significant because they've already encountered the light of His face. That's what hiding does. It prepares you for the places your name will one day be spoken, so that when you get there, you don't lose yourself. You don't forget who called you. You don't trade your oil for applause. And maybe that's where you are right now. You've been wondering why nothing's happening, why things feel slow, why your voice feels silenced, why your gift feels dormant. But maybe, just maybe, this isn't delay, it's design. Maybe you're not overlooked, you're being preserved. Maybe God is protecting you from being launched into a space that would have fed your ego, but starved your soul. Because what God is building in you requires time. It requires depth. It requires hiding. So if this part of your story feels too real, if you know God has hidden you for a reason, then let's talk about it in the comments. Write something like, "I know I'm being hidden for His purpose," or "The hiding is holy," or just share what you've learned in your hidden season, because there's someone else out there feeling unseen, unsure, and forgotten, and your voice might remind them that they're not lost. They're being shaped. They're not stuck. They're being secured in the secret hand of God. If you've made it this far, it's because something in this message stirred your spirit, and we want to hear about it. Take a moment and share in the comments how this video spoke to your heart. What part hit you the deepest? What truth did you need to hear today? Your story, your voice, your vulnerability could be exactly what someone else needs right now. And if this content has blessed you, inspired you, or brought you clarity, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss another powerful word that could transform your walk with God. Click the like button to support this mission and help us reach even more people with the truth and love of Jesus. And finally, don't stop here. There's more waiting for you. The next video is already on your screen, and I believe it's going to speak to you in ways you didn't expect. So go ahead, press play and let God continue the work He started in your heart.